Are you back? I'm going live. Okie dokie. Welcome to the Digital Green Book podcast. Thank you so much for being present with me again today. I am Alana Afro Butterfly Whitaker. I mess up my own name. And here at Digital Green Book, as you know, we interview amazing, dynamic people across the diaspora. Today with me, I'm so blessed and honored to have Brandon Middleton with me. He does a whole host of things, but what really captured my attention is he's working on Web3 with Amazon Web Services. So we're going to talk a little bit about Web3 as it relates to big companies and just Web3 in general and Brandon's journey to how he got where he is now. So thank you, Brandon, for being here today. I'm really grateful.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Excited to have a little conversation about kind of my past experiences here.
That's so amazing. So one of the first things I always love to ask people is how did you come across Web3? What sort of made you aware of it? And then we'll get to the professional capacity of it. But how did you even hear about Web3?
Yeah, Web3 means some different stuff to different people. So I always usually start with like kind of the definitions, right? So, long time ago, people kind of in the fields of engineering who are playing with cryptography um, had imagined kind of what blockchain technologies could look like in these distributed ledger technologies. So, like I myself was electrical and computer engineering, so I did like coding and computer science for my undergrad before I moved out here to the Bay Area in California, where I live. But in school, it wasn't on my radar necessarily. I started working at a networking company called Cisco Systems. So routers and switches and wireless, hardware. I was programming that and making those kinds of devices. And on the side, I started to volunteer at a bunch of community organizations that were focused on STEM and CS for kind of underrepresented talent, like first time in college type of folks. And I wanted to replicate as many Brandons as possible with my spare time. So one particular organization called Street Code Academy. There was a guy named Robbie Greenfield who was working also at Cisco during the time that I was there, and he was teaching kids about the beginning building blocks of cryptocurrency. I think this was like 2016 or so, and just hearing him kind of lecture on the importance of it, kind of the idea that cross-border payments could be done a little bit more seamlessly, where the endpoints, kind of the giver and the receiver, you send 100, and today, like the recipient receives 70. Like those middlemen are gonna get their piece, right? So imagine in a world where maybe 90 or 95 could get to the other side without losing. So much in the middle was captivating for me or interesting for me to think about. And then fast forward a couple of years after 16, like around 2019, work actually started to kind of take me in the direction of looking at this as a legit kind of source of business. The technology was maturing. Folks were starting to pay a lot more attention to it. So, like professionally, I worked in management consulting before AWS, and now at AWS, there seems to be much attention kind of given to the validity of the space. There's a little bit of kind of a wild, wild west feel to it right now because we're still waiting on some policy and some legislation and some regulation to hit the books. But, um, you know, I teach a class at Stanford, and there's one that's being offered for the first time called Web3 Entrepreneurship, CEE 246. And there's a, no lie, 190 seats in this auditorium, and about 300 and something people come every week, like people sitting on the floors, people lining the walls, people in the hallways listening to the microphone, whoever's, on for that week. So there's a lot of energy around it, a lot of startup and entrepreneurship vibes on campuses and kind of off campuses. And I just want to be a part of it. So, yeah, I said a lot, but hopefully some of that kind of answered that particular question about how I found my way into Web3.
I'm finding that is quickly becoming what one of my most curious areas in this entire transitionary period is. So as someone who didn't technically have a tech background, I was an ICU nurse for 13 years, but being in the ICU, we probably deal with the most equipment of any provider in the hospital setting, aside from respiratory therapy or IT themselves. And just learning all of the specs in and around, like the intersection between technology and the human body. I was
Mhm.
fascinated with that for the longest. I really think that's what couldn't pull me away from it for so long. But what you're really getting at is a heavy curiosity area for me. The bridge between Web 2 and Web 3. And it's interesting that you had such a heavy Web 2 background. So hardware, apps, the internet as we know it, browsers, phones, PCs, and now watching Web3 be birthed into this large umbrella of skill sets, everything from the most common things that people know, metaverse, um, Internet of Things. So if people have heard of helium miners or things of that nature, but there's a lot of cool apps and protocols that are being developed on the back end and utilized heavily by big box companies, larger companies that I don't think a lot of people are aware of. And I'm sort of fascinated with that area in particular. So I love hearing your trajectory going from a technically trained Web 2 background as we know it, and now you're teaching a Web3 collegiate course. Like, that's fascinating to me. Could you touch on a few of the things that you plan on covering in your course for this semester?
So let me clarify, like the class that I'm auditing this semester or this quarter at Stanford is called Web3 Entrepreneurship. Um,
Mm-hmm.
uh, a friend of mine is teaching that class. I'm not
Gotcha.
on the teaching team for it. The
Gotcha.
class I teach at Stanford is actually called Redesigning Finance.
Mm,
And in the planning for it, I teach it every spring. I'm probably going to pull more and more Web3, crypto, blockchain ideas into that class, which is housed at the Stanford D School. So folks from the business school, folks from the law school, folks from the
mm,
medical school, and all over campus can choose to go to the Stanford D School and take different courses like mine as electives. So
gotcha.
one cool feature of my class is that I'm never just talking to engineers or just talking to designers or just talking to like law students. So the way
Mm,
that you teach actually has to um, kind of borrow from a common language that all functions and all disciplines can pull from. And when you look at the Web3 community and like all the different types of strokes and folks, people that are in there, it's very similar. Like there's a
mm,
bunch of folks who come from business backgrounds. There's a bunch of folks who come from like the technical and engineering backgrounds. There's a community manager. There's a Discord and Telegram kind of like wranglers of all the talent, and it's something for everybody, which is one of the things that also drew me to the space. So yeah, this Web3 entrepreneurship class
mm,
is a starter kit, I'd say, for a lot of the folks who are participating in it.
mm,
They're bringing in kind of founders from different companies to talk about their origin stories and like how they found their way into blockchain, into crypto, into Web3. Yesterday's lecture, like the head of research, for example, for Bain Capital Crypto,
mm,
um, talked about being a physics PhD from Stanford and the
mm,
math and some of the models that he looked at from a purely engineering perspective were very useful in creating automated market maker technology or some of the financial derivative instruments. Uh, the same calculus that you use on the engineering side is actually useful calculus and useful statistics when you're talking about building these crypto systems. So um, yeah, it's interesting to look at how far away people come from, but then also how a lot of the common things that we all study, a bunch of the common things that we're all interested in, are also kind of the ties that can bind us together in this new emerging technology space.
Now you're gonna make me fly out to Stanford because it's like you're taking on a lot of my interest areas right now. I love, like, I've been studying some market maker concepts on the back end. I love everything crypto. So like, but so now that you're seeing that this sort of curriculum is being adopted in the college space, and working at somewhere affiliated with Amazon Web Services. Could you touch a bit more on how they're trying to enmesh Web3 into their business model, or get it out to the community, or work with people? Like how are they disseminating Web3 services to the world at large? They made this department, so what does it do?
Yeah, I could speak in generalities about like kind of the approach. Um, I've worked kind of across all three of the cloud companies in my career, and when a nascent kind of area of emerging technology pops onto the radar,
Mm-hmm.
um, the most important it's most important to people who are kind of the startup-y, on the ground types of folks, but to
Mm-hmm.
entrenched, very large businesses, $1 million to one individual is different than $1 million to a mega billion or multi-trillion dollar corporation. So you might hear terms like fast follow, or companies might sit there and just monitor the space before like making any meaningful strides towards helping that community or doing anything there. So, what I've seen in the tech industry, especially from like Web2 players, is basically a monitoring of the space. And now that they've seen some activity, they've seen the developer interest, the record amount of venture capital that was poured into the space in 2021, and then 2022 is on a similar clip, even though we have entered a little bit of the crypto winter. So, you're following the money, you're following the talent that's going into the space, and then you're looking at the technology and evaluating some of the tools and looking at its applications for your own internal business. Like what would happen if you could pay for your Amazon.com orders with crypto, or like what would happen, if you could fractionalize stuff in your everyday life, your sneaker collection, your vehicles, your house or whatever, and what are the implications of those applications. And then kind of after fully analyzing all of the risks, all the upsides and all the downsides, kind of making a measured decision about what to do. So, for me, I do business development and sales and some partnerships type of work with startups exclusively. So I only work with startups in my role. And then the kinds of startups that I work with are underneath the umbrella of fintech. And a lot of those underneath the fintech umbrella fit into the crypto kind of blockchain or Web3 category. So it's been interesting to support them. A lot of them use services that the AWS cloud offers, because it's easier to kind of pick up something that's already been built in many cases than to just build it yourself, from scratch, 0 to 1. Um, a lot of what you can do yourself will end up costing you more money. And in
Mm-hmm.
the beginning, AWS was also, it was costing us more money, but over time you find efficiencies, you gain kind of the knowledge of how to do this thing or like operate this system at scale for cheaper. And like internally, we say there's no like compression algorithm for experience. So we've been through so much of the experience and have like figured out a lot of tricks about how to offer what we offer kind of at scale to as many customers as possible at a very like high level of quality. And if you're just starting out now, the prospect of you having to do that and squeeze in, 12, 13, 14, 15 years of AWS experience into your first cycle or your first couple of milestones as a startup, it's like, nah, probably better to partner with somebody that's been there and done that than to try to like do it yourself. So I like to have the philosophy of, do what you do best and try like outsource the rest. And if that outsourcing is to leverage technology that's been built or to leverage playbooks from other folks, then that'll help get you further faster in this space.
But so what does that look like? So especially since you specifically work with founders, smaller startups, and say you run into a pack of small startups, because I do a lot of ancillary work with college students, and they have all these phenomenal ideas, and they're like, man, if only I had these resources. So
Mhm.
definitely in some of the events that I have planned for the spring, I'm working with a lot of college students. So what would be the sort of trajectory, or what would that look like if a young, hungry college student who has all these phenomenal ideas, but they don't necessarily have the funding, the team, if they ran into you, what would that look like hypothetically?
Yeah, one example is something that we have called the AWS Activate program. So
Mm.
Activate is something that we offer to startups that are bootstrapping themselves and to startups that have like taken a seed round or a series A round of venture capital investment. And, we offer kind of free AWS credits for that startup operator to use so that when you look at the cash that you have on hand and all the bills that are going to be piling up as you get this thing started, technology infrastructure after human resources is typically kind of the next biggest expense. So our strategy or our way to provide value to the startup community is to say, hey, for some period of time, here's thousands and thousands of dollars of AWS Activate credits that you can use to build out your idea, your prototype, your business, essentially for free, since we're giving you kind of the credits for however many months, so that you can validate it without burning a hole into the very limited and constrained source of cash that you have right now. So that AWS Activate program is one of the more popular ones. Um, if you've received venture capital investment as well, there's like a mentorship kind of unlock. We've got solution architects and business development folks like myself that participate in those programs and give kind of free game to folks who are one level from that bootstrap step. And all of this is try to help them get to the next stage with fewer like scrapes and scars on them than we had like when we were trying to do this for the first time. So yeah, that's the idea of it. If anybody's watching this and wants to check out the AWS Activate program, feel free.
Definitely. I would say the largest component of my audience is definitely founders. And that is so unintentional. I never sort of anticipated myself being here. When I started interviewing individuals, I just was interviewing very interesting people across the diaspora, because I'm like, we're not a monolith. We do so many varied things. We do so many interesting things. So I really want to showcase that, because just like the way you and I are having a conversation right now, I used to just call people on the phone and have these conversations. And then one day I'm like, I should be having these conversations in front of other people because this information could help someone. And I would say lately, over the last 6 to 8 months, majority of my interviews, I'm either interviewing founders who have phenomenal ideas, or I'm interviewing angels, VCs, learning what a family house is, like getting this terminology out there, because as we know, we've heard the stats, like what is it, less than 0.2% of venture capital is going to like black female founders, less than 1% is going to black founders in totality. So unintentionally, I'm sort of doing my best to learn rapidly about this space as a founder myself, and sort of connect those dots between angels, venture capitalists, and founders as I'm learning this technology, learning these terminologies, learning this space. But it's something I'm falling in love with rapidly. So when I see individuals like yourself, I'm just very optimistic, um, because it's nice to see us in positions that can actually make a change in different spaces. Like what would you say is the main role of a solution architect? Like that's such a cool title. Like what do you do specifically?
Yeah. So back in the day, like at Cisco Systems, I was a solution architect. At Cisco, they call them systems engineers.
Mm,
So my career, like I studied, like I said, ECE, and then went to software engineering. So I did 3 years of software engineering at Cisco on the shipping product,
mm,
working with product managers. And then after that, I moved over to the sales organization. So
mm,
there's the sales person who's responsible for the quota, and they're the lead person. That's called the account manager. So they have like direct revenue responsibility for bringing dollars into the company for the set of customers that they're given. But
Hmm.
typically, an account manager also has a technical counterpart called, at AWS, that's the solution architect. At Cisco, that was a systems engineer. If you go to different places, it's called different things. At Google, it's called like customer engineer, for example. So the idea of that solution architect is, if the technical staff of the customer is coming with very like specific requirements, or they want to build out a new feature or a new set of products, typically the account manager's technical knowledge is only going to go so far. And if a customer were to ask me to roll up my sleeves and like write some pseudocode for an idea that they had, that's not necessarily like within the scope of what I'm supposed to be doing day in and day out. But the solution architect or the systems engineer or that technical part of the account team is good interfacing with customers, so they have like enough personality and like EQ to match the IQ, and then they also have the ability to explain very technical things in layman's terms and make it practical and make it simple, because it's no small feat to like understand all of the 200 AWS services and then go pivot over to Microsoft and understand their 100 plus services and then go to GCP and do the same thing. And um, just within Web3, there's so much like jargon and language that
Hmm.
you have to learn in order to just put one foot in front of the other. Like, um, think about asking your mom to come on a journey with you and you start talking about automated market makers and like blockchain layer 0, layer 1, layer 2, like you're going to lose them real quick unless you're able to translate effectively kind of what you're talking about and make it make sense to like the lowest common denominator. And in my mind, that's always like my granny, or like that's always my mom and dad. So like
Exactly.
when we talk about what does a solution architect do, they're technical enough to interface with the engineer's engineer, but then they're also skilled enough to be able to change their language and um, make it suitable for the CFO. We had to have a business conversation about total cost of ownership, or to the marketing team if we needed to talk about kind of go to market strategy and kind of the give get on a partnership. So um, yeah, the account team, the account manager, the solution architect, and someone like that core team, especially if you're working in the tech industry, is one that we're not taught that much about in college. Like, I knew when I was studying computer science, I knew about the software engineering job, but I didn't know much about, the solution architect type of job, or the account manager and sales and BD. All that stuff was very fuzzy to me when I was in undergrad.
So even putting a pin in that right there, like I really think that's definitely what we're both trying to do, is be that intercessory individual between the common everyday layperson and a highly technical skill set. Because for myself, I like focusing on women, children, and elderly. So when I educate in the Web3 space, I'm finding myself breaking down a lot of these highly technical terms to them. And I do a lot of onboarding. So mine is very cursory level, but I do want to start teaching them intermediate things as well. But
Mhm.
like you say, it takes some time for them to absorb those concepts. So now, even pivoting to what you're saying, as we have a shared interest in getting as many people in our community into these growing, necessary, expansive roles, here in 2022, if you had to look back at young Brandon,
Mhm.
like before your first collegiate course for Web 2, what would you, how could you shorten that learning curve, or what sort of hypothetical trajectory would you give young Brandon? Like, okay, if you want to get to a professional Web3 level working with large companies in this day and age, here's some things you need to do.
Yeah, it's real different like today than what it was when I this is my 18th year in tech. So like coming out of school, I was like doing coding interviews over the phone. There was not as advanced kind of the level of technical tools out there for you to like do interviews, even like to learn a language. Like there was no YouTube in 2004. Like, um, So the way that I learned versus the way that people are learning today is a lot different. But the way that I would learn C or Java or something new now was to
Mm,
lean into kind of the tools of today. I mean, I had to compile code like in a very heavy, IDE that was on my computer. Today, you can open up a web browser, you can go into Remix and basically write some Solidity and have it compile for you right there without having the program even installed like on your laptop. So
mm,
um,
mm,
it's more about putting
mm,
in the time than it is about having the money to buy the stuff that you needed, like as a precursor. So the barriers to entry is mostly to me about how much time like disposable you have to be able to like dig in and learn these things, practice them, who you surround yourself with that can help you continue to like grow your game and see around corners, make sure you're learning the things that will be present in the future and not kind of going down a rabbit hole, learning Windows phone mobile development. Cause like who uses Windows applications or Windows phones now? If we're talking about mobile devices, it's an iOS and like an Android world. So um, without those big brothers and big sisters telling you, actually, maybe you should just stick to Android and iOS and like don't go down this Windows phone route. You might be wasting your time in some of these like nascent kind of areas of technology. So I'm actually envious of students these days just because I feel like we had to go through a little bit more, like to get from point A in my learning to like point B, whereas it's a little bit easier um, today. There are a lot more distractions, so you have to like give yourself an Instagram timeout or budget or limit. You gotta like, say this is my TikTok alarm. I gotta get off after this point in time so I can actually focus and like buckle down and do this. But the accessibility of it is definitely higher today than it was back in the day for me. So um,
Nah, Brandon, don't you turn into one of them people saying back in my day. Don't you do that.
yeah,
Don't
there's
you
only a
do
couple grays down here, but yeah, I might. Hopefully, I look younger than I am.
it. But so thinking about that as well, what would you say are some dope resources that you're aware of that the aspiring founder or a novice founder or even maybe an intermediate or an advanced founder might not be aware of that they should really tap into? You mentioned your accelerator that you have at Amazon Web Services. But what are some things that you tinker with in your free time that people might not be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, just the tools that Web3 people use versus kind of people that aren't in the ecosystem. So you have to familiarize yourself with the Telegrams and the Discords and like just the idea that you're joining a community of learners, some of which you'll never know their true identities or be able to see them or their faces in real life. Like, um, just jumping into the culture is going to expose you to a lot. Um, I didn't, I still don't, tweet as much, follow Twitter. Um, but like you need to be in some of these spaces and following certain people in order to like understand what's happening now and like what will happen in the future. I think most of the people that I run into who are like smart contract engineers or developers, have started at the crypto kitties level or crypto zombies. When it comes to like learning Solidity as a language, your GitHub and like some of the projects that you do are also your resume. So like back in the day when I was interviewing for internships, they're like, resume, cover letter. And these days it's just like, just show me what you've built and like deployed, and I can go and verify just looking at your .eth address, like all the different events you've been to, go over to your GitHub and see all the different projects that you've contributed to, and it's like, oh, I like what I saw, so I'm gonna give you a shot. So even that is a lot different than it was when I was getting into technology in the mid 2000s. So yeah, crypto zombies on YouTube. I got a couple buddies that run something called Whiteboard Crypto. It's a YouTube channel that in 10 minutes or less is kind of explaining different protocols, different L0s, L1s, L2s. They've got a big Discord. Um, there's kind of Unchained podcast that Laura runs. That's kind of like crypto and Web3 and blockchain news. Like she does something daily, and she's up to like episode 400 and something. So she's been doing it for years and years. Um, and again, there's a bunch of podcasts out there. There's Bankless. There's um, a whole bunch of them. There's All In by Chamath. And even for myself, I started something called community college. That's part of the teaching that I do at Stanford and at the University of Illinois. So if you go on Instagram and search like Stanford Community College or Illini Community College, those are two Instagram channels that we put up so that community members could actually audit lectures and classes that I teach um, at no cost to them. So I've got students that get to take the classes for credit, but I never wanted to have cost or access be like a barrier. So to as much to the extent as possible, got a bunch of community conversations through that community college brand on YouTube and Instagram that we've tried to make, again, all this stuff that we're talking about as accessible to the homies that are, back in the neighborhood still out there on the blocks that we grew up in. And I'll continue to try to do that. Like sometimes you have to fight back and forth with the university, like, oh, one is called community college. Let's not like diminish the brand of this tier 1 or tier 2 research institution. But the heart of it is like, I want as many people to know about this and hear this as possible. So yeah, maybe in notes we can drop some links to some of this stuff to folks.
Yes, if you can, and if you can see our private chat right here, I'll type right here. If you can drop a link, that'd be helpful because I'm searching for community college and I'm getting a lot of schools. So, yeah. But something else I think is really cool are some of the overlapping events that we attend. Like DevCon in Columbia was amazing. It was humongous. Perfect. Got the link that you just dropped. So what do you look to gain when you go to different events like that?
Yeah, for me, I went down there to give a talk. There was an event on Monday called InfraCon Day, and that was put on by Pocket Network. So I went out. They're a Web3 infrastructure provider, and one of the companies I work with at AWS. So the idea was for me to contribute to their InfraCon Day and actually deliver a talk about, just what we're talking about. The title of my talk was like designing Web3 experiences for diverse communities. So I talked about a bunch of the stuff that you see on these Instagram channels. I talked about the idea that there should be like nothing about us that's done without us. So the idea that, corporate America could like sample our culture and then go and like represent it without any representation from us. Is something I talked about in the chat or in the talk that I gave. And I basically just went through a decade plus of experiences putting on these technology types of events and programs in my community where I'm from in the South Side of Chicago, where I currently live, kind of in the Bay Area, and just gave best practices for Web3 practitioners that were having good intentions, but maybe didn't know how to start or needed kind of a couple of ideas to get them going. Because it's clear that we need a lot more builders and a lot more talent in the space. But if you don't connect with those demographics that you say you want in the space, then there's a lot of blockers that exist today that will keep them from coming and applying for those jobs, contributing to your communities, and like collaborating with you on those projects. So yeah, I'll find a little talk I gave here and throw that in the chat as well if anybody wants to check it out.
Yes, please. So I think that's such a cool initiative, and I feel that way as well. So I would like to touch on IP for a hot second. I know neither of us are necessarily in litigation, but a question that someone posed to me at an event I was just at this weekend, which I thought was a very insightful question, is how, as a founder, can I ensure if I'm partnering with a lot of these bigger box companies, if I come to them and I use their cloud services or their cloud credits, is there something in the EULA or in the fine print that does not protect my IP, that does not protect my idea? Or how does that sort of work when a smaller founder or someone with a great idea comes and they build on your web services? What sort of protections do they have?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's nothing that any of the platforms will take as their own. Um, each of the platforms do comply with kind of the local legislation and the laws of whatever country that your data is sitting in. So, like, if you're in the United States and the business that you have is doing something nefarious, and the police come and ask you, or they ask the provider for your data, like, here's the warrant, here's the subpoena, and everything. It's unreasonable, as a business, for you to not comply with kind of these government or these state mandates. So each of the platforms will comply. But in terms of the IP, if you're running a like legal business, um, Airbnb, Pinterest, Uber, like there's Coinbase, there's all of these businesses that have literally started as one person, two people in a garage, won a pitch competition, and their IP has kind of stayed with them throughout the whole entirety of them building from very, very small beginnings all the way up through kind of IPOing. So there's nothing in the T's and C's or the EULA of any of the cloud providers or the platforms that are out there that will kind of take what's on top of them and like pull it back as owned by kind of the uh, underlying companies.
Okay, well that's good to know because little, there's a little distrust there with some larger companies and smaller founders, and I think that's why a lot of people do sometimes spend time bootstrapping. So I do want to do what I can do to sort of demystify or diminish or reduce that fear. And it's helpful to be able to have these frank conversations because we need to know. We need to know. um I guess as we wind down here, one of the questions that I really would like to know is what's something that you haven't yet seen yourself do inside of this space that you're really aspiring to do, as far as it pertains specifically to Web3, or something that you're building. Feel free to shill whatever you are doing.
Um, what haven't I been able to do yet? I haven't myself kind of raised traditional financing and kind of branched out to do my own company as of yet. I did something really small in business school when I was at UC Berkeley, kind of doing the evening and weekend MBA program.
Mhm.
This was back in like this is like a decade ago, and we were trying to be Stripe essentially. So we had a payments platform that we initially offered to nonprofits for basically like at cost, and we tried to scale out super fast. And Stripe beat us to the punch and did a bunch of stuff that we were planning to do. But we raised a small kind of seed round. It ran as like a lifestyle business for a little bit after that. And then I've been like just focused on tech and management consulting, and now back in kind of tech again at AWS. So maybe in the future, I'll try to launch a company in the Web3 space. And this teaching stuff that I do is also really interesting. I like giving back to the next generation, being able to share my experiences, and kind of the idea that if you help somebody win, that you win too.
Period.
I felt that many, many times as I've helped people to get hired at different companies I've worked at, provided coaching or mentorship to people that are launching out and doing some really interesting things. So, um, yeah, teaching or entrepreneurship, there'll probably be common threads of life even as we move forward from here.
Well, I think that's the best way to go about it. And I wouldn't want to build a future where I wasn't attempting to pull my community along with me.
Mhm.
Um, one of the things I intently want to focus on going into 2023, 2024 is helping upskill individuals inside of this space. So, like you said, is the way you onboard into this space rapidly evolves from day to day. So instead of a traditional resume, it's a GitHub. Instead of trying to show up to boot camps and things, you might have to learn the rough and dirty online on some Web3 platforms, build some different things out. Showing up to conventions and conferences has definitely been clutch for myself. Finding mentors, joining communities and DAOs. Some exciting announcements pertaining to that coming up soon, but going to hold off on that for a little bit. But everyone, just if you're looking to break into this space and you're looking for practical, tangible ways to do that, definitely plug in. Please go back through any of my old interviews. I always try to include tangible resources for you to connect to. And definitely, if you're looking at data languages, what would your 3 top data languages be right now, Brandon?
So for data, I'd say, R and Python are the ones that I see kind of most frequently.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't talked about AI and ML a lot, but I do think kind of the intersection of AI and ML with Web3 is going to be a huge um, peanut butter and jelly sandwich, let's say. If you put those two together, there's some very interesting combinations that could come out. So yeah, there's even like tooling that AWS and kind of the other providers are offering, so that if you don't know Scala or you don't go super deep into Golang or any of the languages, you can still participate. You can still have an idea, kind of spin up an instance, kind of run your model, and kind of train the data set and kind of pull insights from it, even if you don't have like the technology skills. So, yeah, for those that are out there that are like crypto curious and looking to another like emerging area of technology, we've seen kind of very, very fast innovations happen in the fields of natural language processing and image recognition, inference. There's these huge, huge language models that are out there that'll allow you to, tell your Google Home to do stuff or tell your Alexa devices to do stuff, and go grab all the information from the internet, bring it back, and then help apply it to something that's Web3 specific. So I'm excited about those areas and those startups that'll come like as the combination of two things I love: AI, ML, and Web3.
I think that's amazing. There's so many areas inside of tech that need that Web3 update and that Web3 reboot. Um, Definitely AI, definitely machine learning, definitely Internet of Things. So if y'all aren't aware what that is, think Google Maps, but for everything. um, there's a lot to get into. So don't be afraid to dive into this space, and the internet is at your fingertips. So please feel free to start diving in. I want to take your class. This was awesome. Yes. Yes, Lord. But thank
Yeah,
you so much for being here today, Brandon.
yeah. Thank you again for having me. If folks want to reach out on Twitter, I'm at BRMIDDLE, so BR Middle. Same on LinkedIn. Feel free to hit me up, ask me questions. And again, if it's a win for you, and I know you, it's a win for me too. Like, I'm trying to see as many people enter the space, and as many of us, like, even if you don't win via like exit from a company, if you can economically kind of improve your outcomes and make it so that you can sustain yourself or help your mom and your family kind of pay their bills and do better than what they were able to do in their generation, I'm still smiling at that. So
Okay.
to the extent that technology and this industry and what we're learning right now can help us just as a community get better, um, I'm about it. So hit me up. Thank you again for having me, and appreciate the time here.
Of course. And what was your Twitter handle again? I want to put on the screen.
Sure. BR Middle. That's my Twitter. That's my Telegram. That's my LinkedIn. Yeah.
That's your everything. This you?
Yeah, that's me.
Boom, we connected now. Boom, Afro Butterfly in the house. Yes, sir. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you so much. And feel free to share this podcast with someone. This will be on LinkedIn, YouTube, and then in a few days, it'll be up on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much for tuning in to Digital Green Book. Thank you.